Wait, is that Sweet Home Alabama? Oh, yep, it's the song. Yo, chill, man. Copyright infringement. Totally wrong thing. You know what, let's get the real Werewolf of London in here. Roll the tape.
Cinematic fantastic.
Klaatu, Barada, Nikto.
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Bitten by a werewolf and lives, becomes a werewolf himself.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to the Cinematic Fantastic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Weatherford.
And your other host, William Weatherford.
Get ready for opinions, dad jokes,
And dad jokes.
as we watch and review sci-fi and fantasy films from the classics of yesteryear to the new favorites of today. I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand, walking through the streets of Soho in the rain. He was looking for a place called Lee Ho Fook's for to get a big dish of beef chow mein. Ahoo, Werewolves of London. With some people will know that song. It's Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
The Werewolf of London, 1935.
Yeah, welcome one and all to Cinematic Fantastic. This is episode 3 of season 2. We are firmly moving forward,
Having a howlin' time.
having a howling good time.
And last episode we did the epic awaited sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, which my verdict on that was really great. Better done than Frankenstein, in fact, but
In many ways.
in many ways. But I would have loved to see the book come to life in, crisp black and white James Whale style, just imagine it for me here. Boris Karloff standing on an icy sheet, maybe like an iceberg in the background.
Yeah.
Boris Karloff and Henry are having a stare down surrounded by the frozen ocean. Henry is crumpled over. Hyperthermia is reaching him as he crawls forward amidst whistling snow. And he's crawling, he's shivering, maybe he's saying through his teeth something like, it was never meant to be like this. I'll end this madness if it's the last thing I'll do. And Boris with a great monologue book style. It would fit with the third movie as well. The both of their bodies are magically recovered anyway, so
Right.
who's to say they weren't recovered from the Arctic?
Yeah.
I'd love that. I'd have loved to see that.
But there have been a couple of actual faithful Frankenstein movies.
I just would have loved to see it in the James Whale style.
There's one called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's pretty close.
Anyway, yeah, but for now, we're doing the parallel produced movie, The Werewolf of London, 1935. This and The Bride of Frankenstein were being produced at the same time, as we talked about earlier. They are being filmed at the same time. And as such, the film originally was gonna obviously have Boris Karloff as Dr. Glendon and Bela Lugosi as Dr. Yogami. Yet another Boris and Bela Lugosi film, but since Bride of Frankenstein was already happening, Karloff was already doing stuff, so Universal had to recast it.
No, I know they wanted to use Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in everything, but you can't always do that in everything.
But that's what makes the film a lot better casted, it seems, because it's more interesting. Because, we have Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff all the time in the 1930s. Universal did lots of stuff with them. Even if Bela Lugosi didn't even need to be in a film, he was in it probably sometime, somewhere. He was, both of them were in a lot of different things together. It's refreshing to see new people in the cast, and as we'll talk about later, these are pretty great people. But yeah, the makeup.
Yeah.
Jack Pierce originally had this proto-Wolfman makeup in mind. By the Wolfman, I mean the 1946, 9, when it came out.
I thought it was 42, 41, 42?
Something like that in the 40s. The Wolfman would be the more recognized werewolf movie, actually. But this
1941.
film actually... 1941, but this movie came before that, interestingly enough, and as such, Jack Pierce sort of had ideas for how to do a werewolf, and this was sort of his proto-design for him, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna have this, lovely makeup on you. It seems Henry Hull, actor for Dr. Glendon. He didn't want his face covered, probably due to, dislike of makeup, sitting still for hours, the script also requiring the werewolf to be recognizable as Glendon.
Yeah.
All that just added up into, please make it a lot less. Pierce at first was like, no, I want my cool vision, but Lemley was like, yeah, you need to not do that. But the makeup is fairly interesting, though. The Wolfman sort of had this from looking at it. He had a very tall hair, going taller.
Yeah.
As compared to in this movie where it's more close to the face in terms of his haircut. And again, it also has that V as well.
Kind of a widow's peak.
Kind of a widow's peak. But the interesting thing is that it is said that this is the first werewolf movie by Universal here, which is interesting. However, it seems that it was not technically the first. There was a silent lost short film that was called The Werewolf, and there was a movie called Wolf Blood. No, not that Wolf Blood. It's Wolf Space Blood. It's an early film. Basically, the plot of that is a guy is injected with, wolf blood to save his life from, I don't know, industry action. Maybe operated like a tractor and it broke his arm or something.
Wow.
Or something. But he had to save his life, get injected by wolf blood, and throughout the movie, he has to deal with getting blamed for murders because obviously people think he's a werewolf now. So that's a pretty interesting, I guess, but that's only where the werewolf happens. And again, as I said, the Lost movie, The Werewolf, was only 20 minutes long. So, but this is the first proper.
One of those Méliès kind of shorts. I mean,
Méliès did 5-minute stuffs.
Yeah, he did.
He was really early. This is before they had longer tapes and could do 20-minute stuff.
Yeah, he wanted to do quality and quantity. In terms of the number of movies that he put out, were just tons.
And we don't even have half of them.
Right, because a lot of them got burned.
Because they all got lost, and he probably burned them as well. We talked about that in our first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember how I was talking about Universal playing catch-up to RoccoW a little bit? I was talking about how there was some stuff, and then Universal was playing catch-up to, the original music thing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 1931 inspiration, especially from some of the makeup, the special effects, and stuff. If I do recall, that was Paramount, though, actually, but it's still sort of playing catch-up, and, there was some inspiration from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Especially how the werewolf's makeup looks a lot like the Hyde design. He does indeed go in a raincoat out at one point in this movie.
Yeah.
As well as he does in the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie. Although that movie is much, much better for characterization, the
it's amazing.
cinematography. It's definitely on par with Frankenstein, Dracula, and stuff, which is ludicrously amazing for a rival company, especially.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. So again, but Bela Lugosi would be a character, a small role as the werewolf who bites Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman. So he would get a werewolf role.
Yes.
Though a much smaller, more memorable one. I would have to agree. Short thing, the film score was a combination of Carl Hajos, I guess. That's a weird name. It's Hajos.
Right.
Or Hajos, if I want to be pronounce the J.
I think you were right the first time.
So it was his original work, classical music, and bits from our last two movies, The Invisible Man and The Black Cat. Or not last two, because technically Bride of Frankenstein. But you get what I mean. Some of those were taken from there. And those are some pretty great movies, especially Invisible Man, that's pretty great. Go check out that one. Reception. In the New York Times, a guy named Frank Nugent said that it was a charming bit of lycanthropy, designed solely to amaze and horrify. The film goes about its task with commendable thoroughness, sparing no grisly detail and springing from scene to scene with even greater ease than that oft attributed to the daring young aerialist. Granted that the central idea has been used before, the picture still rates the attention of action and horror enthusiasts. It's a filling valedictorio for the old Rialto Theater, which has become melodrama's citadel among Times Square's picture houses. So he's talking about this theater house that it was the last production of.
The Rialto Theater, yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
Like I think the Rialto was famous for those kind of movies of the time, those kind of horror pictures. So that's where you would go to see that.
And other critics also were like, this is really too similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Right.
I could definitely see where they're coming from. As I said, there's lots of inspiration. The movie was a box office disappointment. After all, it would seem to be so. Because after all, people are like, the Wolfman. They talk about that more often than this movie, even though it was the one that Universal made first, and it also sort of jump-started a lot of werewolf properties that would continue to be integrated into the lore and society, which I'll talk about after the legacy of this movie. Again, there was a 1978 song by Warren Zevon called Werewolf of London, sort of based on the film. There was a Carl Dreadstone book based on this film. There was also a Black Lagoon one as well. It's the creature from the Black Lagoon. He's interesting that he did those two.
Oh, Carl Dreadstone. Okay, he did adaptations of those two. Oh, interesting. When were those written?
I don't know, like
probably late 70s.
1977. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
However, the Carl Dreadstone book ends differently, with Glendon deciding to work with Yogami. Because of this film, they don't really decide to work together. He decides to work together in this one. They try and use hypnotism to control their transformations into werewolves, which results in Glendon and Yogami having a climactic duel because it failed,
Wow.
And it ends with Yogami's death. Glendon is still alive after this, but he contemplates addendum mortis, which is interesting for adaptation. Though, as we'll talk about the plot later, I will agree that deciding to work with Yogami was actually a change for the better in comparison to this movie, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Rotten Tomatoes score is 6.4 out of 10, and a guy named Leonard Maltin,
yes,
he called it dated but still effective, and he complimented Warner Oland's acting, which, fun fact, Warner Oland played the detective Charlie Chan.
Yes.
I knew he recognized him. He looks great for it, Even though he's Swedish, he sort of has this Asian look about him that sort of makes Charlie Chan sort of look... You might be able to see him, like, a little bit as a knockoff, but he's such popular a character, and he pulls it off, and he looks great for that role, that I do agree that he does a really great Charlie Chan. Having seen it, what do you think about Warner Oland?
Well, here's the thing, is... I think we had talked about people that did blackface, yellowface, brownface. I would have liked to see an actual Asian actor here, because even Boris Karloff did. He played Dr. Fu Manchu, which is a Chinese supervillain kind of character. I don't know if I can find those online, but those are that's considered yellow peril.
I think Warner Oland also played like a Fu Manchu role as well. I think maybe.
Right. Here, the thing about what's called yellow peril is about the time of the 30s and 40s. You would have a villain character, and he would be this inscrutable Asian kind of character. He would be evil, and as we get into the 40s, it's the yellow peril kind of issue kind of bled over into the propaganda against the Japanese people, anybody of that descent, because Japan was the enemy, so it was open season to make them just every Japanese person this horrible villain. It also caused America to put a lot of Japanese people in these concentration kind of camps in California.
And especially over World War II, this would be terrible for the Japanese people.
Yes.
But Charlie Chan, for being a Swedish dude, honestly does do an Asian role pretty well. Because, who would think that a Swedish guy would somehow look like an Asian dude by birth and by genetics?
Yeah, and he does a good job, but honestly, I like it better when you have someone of the same race playing the character. It just... It makes it more...
It makes him seem like he's not a knockoff you know.
Yeah, more you want authentic characters. I mean, you don't want to have a guy going, "Hey, I'm a white guy, but I'm going to play an African." Okay, that's a little bit much. So why does a white guy get to play a Chinese man? It just, but the thing is though, people, their minds opened, I think, as movies progressed. So did people's mindset. There's some progression that needs to happen in terms of equality and things like that. That's the way things would just travel that way, I think, as we got into the civil rights era. I think a lot of other people kind of piggybacked off of that and went, you know what, we need to have Asian parts for Asian actors, and that started happening a lot more. In Invisible Agent, we see Peter Lorre, who played in M. He plays
Hans Beckert.
The Hans Beckert guy, but he also played a Japanese detective named Mr. Moto. He was kind of the Japanese Charlie Chan. So again, there was that going again. I do think that he does a decent job, but I think that they could have had an Asian actor that spoke English and would have done just as good or better.
Yeah, but that was a big side note. Again, we're still talking about the legacy, though.
Yeah.
It aired on the April 2nd, 2022 episode of Svengoolie, which is fairly recent, but what is Svengoolie?
Okay, here we go. Back in the day, in different places, many times on public access cable, which is basically somebody would pay money out of their own pocket, and it's almost like with podcasting, except they would come in and make their own show. And Svengoolie was this guy who would put on kind of ghoulish makeup, just gray makeup with black around his eyes, and he would host a show, and he would say, "Welcome, kiddies, it's time for some more science." He would show science fiction and horror movies, ones they had access to, and he would host them. And there'd be all these like beakers, and it's amazing. It's still on YouTube if you can find it. It's like got beakers. No, not that beaker. But he's got the little Jacob's ladder things. Everything you would see in Frankenstein's lab, he could have there. As they would go to commercial break, he would, say something spooky or kind of cool. And there's so many people that remember watching Svengoolie as a young man or young woman or whatever.
But I'm happy that it's been airing even to this day.
Yes, because they get rights to show it. Also, TNT had Monster Vision. They would show Godzilla movies and horror movies, and
so obviously they'd have this one as well.
Oh, it was great. I think Turner Classic Movies had that. Usually it happens in October.
Interesting stuff about that.
Oh yeah, we could just sit there and all night long and just watch spooky movies like from the 30s. It's great.
Okay, so there were also the films An American Werewolf in
London, yes,
and its sequel, An American Werewolf in
Paris. Yeah,
and again we have Werewolf of London and American Werewolf in London. Very similar, but
no, very different.
People could get that confused, but it came out later.
The effects, it has a transformation effect of the main character into a werewolf that is it's amazing. I could show it to you. The rest of the movie has got some stuff that's maybe questionable for a youth of your caliber, but the transformation sequence is insane. And they play the song Blue Moon in the background while it's doing it.
Bit on the nose.
Yeah, but it's great. They also use the song I See a Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Lots of moon stuff.
Yeah.
And then so they're going to do When the Moon Hits Your Eye Like a Big Pizza Pie.
Now, wait. There is another part of the lore that's in that is the past victims of the werewolf will show up as these ghostly, almost like they look like a kind of a freshly dead zombie. Then they start decaying until they're just real meat-looking people.
Speaking of additions to the lore, you want to talk about a little bit about werewolf lore?
Werewolf lore, and then what the werewolf lore this movie did. That'd be great.
Especially. So, again, the werewolf is a European invention. It comes from the Old English werewolf for man-wolf, or you could call him a lycanthrope, which is from the ancient Greek lycanthropos, wolf-human. It's a guy who can shapeshift into a wolf or a hybrid, most likely placed under a curse or affliction with transformations occurring on the night of a full moon. Early written sources date back to, before the 12th, so even back to AD 26.
Yeah, there was a story of a guy named King Lycaon, which is where you get lycanthropy. And King Lycaon was transformed into a wolf that was a curse of his. So
interesting. So the interesting thing is that the belief in werewolves was developing in parallel to the belief in witches. which is, of course, the late Middle Ages, and toward that, they did the witchcraft trials. So the trials of the werewolves, the supposed werewolves, that is, merged in what is now Switzerland, especially the Valais and the Vaud. I think those are alternative names for the werewolf people. In the early 15th century, it spread throughout Europe in the 16th, peaking into the 17th, and subsiding in the 18th century, which is interesting. The persecution of werewolves in the associated folklore is an integral part of the witch hunt phenomenon, albeit a marginal one, and accusations of lycanthropy being involved in only a small fraction of witchcraft trials. So basically, it wasn't really too popular at all until a guy named Peter Stump came along in 1598. Werewolf of Bedford, he was called. He was like a serial killer, and he was accused of being a werewolf as well. He got executed. His death brought up the interest and persecution of werewolves in the place. The persecution stuck around near Austria in particular until the early 18th century, which is interesting. Like, it's around Austria, basically. The things that this movie invented, which is interesting to think that it actually invented something, was it invented? Their origin, biting the victim, they turn to a werewolf, passing it down,
Yeah.
It was more of a witchcraft-related thing, and, they apprenticed themselves to ability, which is really interesting. Early yonder ages, there was, like, a whole, like, clan or something. You get, like, you reach, like, your full potential with, like, a ceremony, and you turn to, like, you get they're obsessed with werewolves, with wolves or something. That's weird. But that's besides the point.
There's one ritual I remember where they would take, you take a wolf and you remove its skin and you take the fat from the wolf and turn it into like almost like a greasy mixture, and you rub it all over your skin, and you put the wolf fur on your back, and there's some kind of other stuff you mix into the wolf fat too. Some people say it's hallucinogens.
Don't do this at home, kids.
Yeah, don't mix hallucinogens in with your rendered wolf fat.
That's like the NyQuil chicken phenomenon that went on last year. Please don't do that. That is medicine. Don't use NyQuil in your chicken, guys.
I don't even want to know.
It's steaming up into your eyes and your face and your orifices, But that's besides the point. Anyway, previously, you'd apprenticed yourself to the ability of turning into a wolf or a werewolf. The movie invented them being biting and passing it down as the origin of a werewolf. It also invented their form, being, half wolf and half man, which is interesting because previously they thought you'd just turn into a regular wolf.
Yes.
In this movie was where it turned into like a half and half beast.
Beast
instead
man.
of just the animal. Beast man. Transformers Beast Wars, anybody?
Yes, please.
That'd be awesome, though. Lego Chiba, anybody?
Yes, Lego Chima. Bring it on.
Lego Chiba. There's a lot of wolf people in that. It invented the full moon as the cause of transforming, which is interesting, because before it's like, you do it at will because you have the power. I have the power!
Yes.
More cheesy references to old movies.
Oh, and 80s TV shows.
Old 80s TV shows, and a 2013 one. But that's besides the point. It invented the full moon as the cause. They did introduce a thing where you must kill one person every night you're a werewolf.
Yes.
Or you die. Which, it doesn't really get used after this movie, but it's really, really interesting, though.
Yeah, and it plays into the stories.
Before people can wonder, like, it's a werewolf. Is it, like, feral? That's why it's killing people? Does it have, like, does it want to kill people in particular? Like, what's going on with that? Is it just an animal that just randomly wants to kill people? No. This movie introduced the fact that it was just a thing that werewolves had to do or else they died, which, while slightly cheesy in thought, really does provide lots of good motivation for such a thing.
It does, especially the one about it kills the one it loves the most.
Especially that we'll talk about in the plot.
It invented that because my thought was, what if it's somebody who hates everyone? Then you're safe, I guess.
Then you're safe, I guess. So
a lot of werewolf movies that I've seen where the person knows they're going to turn, they have things put in place to keep them from killing other humans. I saw one where, interestingly enough, he would go out to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. What he would do first is he would tie to his foot a rope that had a chicken carcass, and he would walk all over the forest, and then he would bury the chicken somewhere. So basically, when he turned into a werewolf, he would be sniffing around looking for the chicken carcass all night long. And so when the full moon was over, then he would go to somewhere in the forest and find a bag with clothes, because he would rip out of his clothes when he turned into a full werewolf. So it's like, if you know that you're going to turn, you could go and maybe
keep yourself in an area.
A cage. There's one where you could have a cage, or you could, you have some food there for yourself, but you're kind of trapped, and the door doesn't open. It's like timed. It doesn't open until you are no longer a werewolf.
Although in this movie, the cure is a flower, which is interesting.
An antidote, more like it. It's
an antidote, more like it, because the cure, as we said, was killing the person you love you most. Last thing, the director, Stuart Walker. My man's has a 5-year directing career? What are you doing with your life, man? Like, seriously, he was a Broadway actor until he decided to direct like 9-10 movies. And then after his 5-year directing career, he went to uncredited producing for the other half of his puny career. It's like, what are you doing? So this dude is just like, I'm gonna act and do Broadway and stuff, but it's like, oh, I want to be a director. I'm gonna direct a couple movies, But then he went to like uncredited work for the rest of his career instead of directing.
Why would you do that? Now here, I have some possibilities. All right, let's say when you're directing, you've got these other people like producers and executives telling you, remember how we talked about you have to cut your film up, think about it. Orson Welles.
Oh yeah, the producer probably is the one more in control, because the producer is actually the one that hires the director and oversees the script writing.
That's true. And maybe he just was like, I don't have to be credited. What if he could just pay me?
Just pay me, and I'll help you set up your journey for a film, which is basically sort of producers.
Yeah, and maybe he wanted to be more away from that part of the camera because there was a lot of stresses involved. Maybe he had a bad experience as a director, or it was just a lot for him to take. He is a former actor, so maybe he had relationships with actors that he could really use a lot. I don't know. He didn't like it, so there you go.
That is one of the strangest film careers I have really seen so far.
Oh, get ready. You're going to see some crazier stuff.
Had the tiniest career, and then he turned it into uncredited directing for the other half of it. So it's just like 20 movies in total, sort of 10 he directed, 10 that he produced, uncredited. And it's just, what on earth is his life? That's all I really had for that, actually. So it seems we can go into the plot immediately, which is interesting.
Yeah, we can have a little, we can do a little break. So if somebody wants to just, take a break and then come back, we can do that.
And then we'll get back into the plot of Werewolf of London.
Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Okay.
And we're back on Good Morning America. Actually, no, this is Cinematic Fantastic.
Right.
How about a little sum up by me, basically, of what the film is about? We forgot to do that, and we've really forgotten to do that for the past many episodes. So, basically, the film is out in Tibet. There's a dude, and I think there was another dude. They're botanists. They're trying to get the flower that grows only in the night to study it. However, the dude gets bitten by a werewolf, and when he returns home, he shines beams of night at the flower to make it bloom.
Right.
Meanwhile, there's this other botanist who happens to be the other werewolf. This isn't really a spoiler. He says it in the first lines, which is interesting. So basically, he's like, yo, you have a flower. This flower happens to cure werewolfery, which is, again, they didn't say lycanthropy, which is interesting, even though it's...
Don't they say lycanthrophobia?
They do say lycanthrophobia at one point, which is
that
funny.
That doesn't make any sense.
Werewolfery and lycanthrophobia are not the right words to be using, but anyway, he's like, yo, you have a cure for werewolfery. How about we share this? Because, we're both werewolves, by the way, because I bit you. He says this the first time. But then, however, the botanist goes like, no way, Jose, am I going to do that? You're just going to reveal this to the world, and I don't want to reveal it yet. So they sort of have a tussle, I guess. He starts transforming into a werewolf, and meanwhile, we have the other dude who's trying to steal it away, eventually steals it, and they have this conflict until we get them dealing with the werewolf until the end of the movie. So that was the sort of sum up of what we're about to talk about in the plot. So take it away, Father.
I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but this movie moves pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially with all of the fillery elements in this
goodness.
movie.
It does not have enough werewolf scenes, to be honest, but what you do see of the werewolf is somewhat effective.
And especially the special effects paired with the werewolf. We'll talk about how cool that is.
Yes, especially one.
Also want to take mention to the version that we looked at was really clear. Like, had really sharp, clear-looking image.
It's all about the source you get it from.
It's all about the source, but just thanks to the people who restored it, or
yes.
like maybe it was just the cameras got better in 1935, but I noticed it definitely, and I was like, wow, this looks a lot better than what we've been seeing.
What I can tell you is cameras and the ability to restore and keep those things from degradation, those things both went up. As we go, obviously the quality of these films, especially the quality of films, some of them, the quality may go down as far as, how goofy they are and the acting and how wooden it is.
But cameras would be, just technology would be on an upward arc. Maybe a parabola, if you will.
No, the quality of the frame and the pictures, and many of it definitely does go up, even if sometimes the acting and special effects go down. But let's get started. So now we are told that we're in Tibet by a zoom in. Intrepid scientist Dr. Wilfred Glendon is his name, of Britain. He journeys to a remote area in Tibet. He's looking for a rare species of phosphorescent moonflower. It was known to science as the Maryphasa, okay? Blooming only at night. Its full scientific name is Maryphasa lumina lupina.
My family always just called them night howlers.
And especially from seeing about this flower and seeing the flower, I was just like, flower, gleam and glow.
Yes.
Let your flower shine from Tangled.
From Tangled, yeah, especially
2010 or 11, by the way.
Yes.
Just, you can think about that, because the same movie had a flower that was themed based off of the sun or the moon.
Yeah.
In Tangled's case, it was the sun. It was a cure to some sort of disease in the beginning.
Yes.
It's interesting to see how they sort of compare as a thematic element, though. But I was thinking of Tangled while seeing this for the first time.
We will see another plant-based werewolf-connected thing in the wolf's bane. You will find out when we get to the Wolfman.
So this is sort of a wolf's bane before the wolf's bane, basically.
Yeah, kind of. So the scene, we are told, is in Tibet, but you can't fool me. It's the Vasquez Rocks in California. Let's give a quick history. Vasquez Rocks is the background of the fight between Captain Kirk and the Gorn in Star Trek. Thank you to the fame from Star Trek. It's now called Kirk's Rock as a kind of a joke on that. But not this time. It wasn't. We didn't get there yet. So Star Trek was not the only thing shot there. A lot of films and TV series.
I mean, it's really good, especially when you have like this alien planet that's rocky. Get a good quarry in there.
Yes.
You can turn into Mars or Venus, maybe, if you have some yellow special effects.
Maybe Vulcan.
Or Vulcan.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff you could do with a quarry or a mountain that's relatively uninhabited. You can't see any villages in a mile's radius sight. That's amazing for that.
Two TV series that did a lot with quarries would be Doctor Who and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
And especially this mountain looks really great. But
it is awesome. That's where I recognize it from. So the Sherpas, or the Tibetan nomads that show you where things are, basically.
I think they call them coolies in the movies.
Oh, coolies. You know what that is? That's basically a Chinese or Asian stereotype. Calling them coolies. It's not nice.
It's an outdated term.
It
Please
is
don't use it.
Outdated and racist. So the Sherpas flee in fear as he and Mr. Hugh Renwick are given a warning of evil things afoot in a forbidden forest by a priest. And this priest is played by Egon Brecker, who we last saw in The Black Cat as Pearl Zig's major domo. I did not know that until I saw Egon Brecker. Wait a minute. I looked at. I think that's him. Yeah, the one we said looked like Bela Lugosi's brother.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How he's slowly breching the reality.
Well, all I can say...
He's a reality brecher.
All I can say is Pax Vobiscum, my son. All right, so...
Piece of something?
Something. Anytime somebody warns of things man was not meant to know, it's obviously an invitation to check it out, right? So for some reason, while they're coming through a little passageway, something messes with Renwick's feet and they won't work. I thought that was kind of goofy. Glendon tells him it's the basis of all superstition. It's all in his mind. And then it happens to him and he does the weird, goofy walk too. I thought that was weird. So Wilfred Glendon, he finds the flower, the Mary Feza, and we don't see Renwick anymore. Like, what happened to him? We don't see him until way later in the movie, and I almost didn't recognize him when you see him at that party at the end. So he's one of the people at the party. We think that might be him. We do see this fuzzy-headed guy in shadow over the hill with this hunching animalistic beastman shadow that he's showing. This is obviously a werewolf. At the moment, the doctor is poised to get this rare plant. This animal-like creature, a.k.a. the werewolf, springs on him, and he wards him off by stabbing it with a knife. It is my theory that that's the reason why the other guy has a limp or needs a cane. Does that make sense?
Interesting.
So he bites. They bites Glendon on the arm, and then we see him like reaching toward the plant with the blood coming off his arm. It's kind of a good shot. So returning to London, Dr. Glendon has taken the whole rock.
He stole the whole rock?
They had it from the set, so...
Yeah, might as well.
With him with the Mary Feza plant. See, the Mary Feza plants were like coming out of the rock. I guess they were, the vines were, whatever.
So I guess the root of all things is Dwayne Johnson.
The root of all things is Dwayne Johnson. Yes, do you smell what Dr. Glendon is cooking? All right, so it grew in his laboratory, but he could not make it bloom. So he devises this moon ray machine whose light imitates the light of the full moon. It starts to produce two buds, and they would bloom at the next full moon.
And as we said earlier, again, they would have some different machines that would probably be passed around from Bride of Frankenstein. You know, we have a lot of stuff here, says Bride of Frankenstein. Here, we'll loan you this stuff because you need it. And he goes, oh, thanks, sure. And then gives it back after he's done. That's
yeah. And there's tons of beakers and all different kinds of materials in the lab that don't really get used, except you just see them bubbling in the background. That's common with a lot of these mad scientist movies. So my question to you, William, is...
My question for this, though...
Go ahead,
Our
Red.
next movie is a movie called The Invisible Ray.
Yes.
Would they reuse this prop, or would this be a different prop?
I don't know. They always...
We'll have to compare that when we get to it, what they look like.
It's very difficult to tell. There's only one instance of a special kind of prop that showed up in Star Trek Next Generation, and you see it in so many other different movies and things. Once you see it, you'll never unsee it. But I can't really put my finger on some of these props and how they pass through different hands in different productions. I don't know. That your guess is as good as mine.
How it got all the way to Paramount? No clue.
Right. So my question is, how long does a full moon last? And I looked this up. A full moon lasts only an instant. To the naked eye, though, the moon can appear to be full or up for upwards of 3 days.
Maybe technically a full moon could be like, oh, maybe it passed 1% from being full, and then you just see most of it covered. So it's like, oh, it's a full moon, even though that's basically a rounding error from our vision codes, I guess.
I actually watched, I actually saw a video, I think it might be Because Science, I think, guy talks about this. He talks about werewolf-ism that changed due to the full moon. The full moon is actually just a reflection of the sunlight. It's just mirrored.
Right.
So could you not reflect the sun onto somebody, and or it could just be a mental thing where if they think that the full moon light is shining on them, that they'll turn. Like it's a mental hang-up that they have or some kind of thing. Because why would a moon light change you? That's weird.
So technically, if you stared straight into a spotlight, you could also get that feeling as well.
Maybe it has to be a reflection.
It would also burn your eyes out, but you know.
Yeah, turn to goo. All right. So that's just an inside joke. So Glendon is gotten attention of by his wife on his Ring video doorbell screen, right?
Yeah, we get, especially the black cat, we saw like a thing that said, Hans Perlzig is here. And we have like this little screen that has stuff. Obviously from Invisible Man, we know that there was a lot of green screen use, or as we do it, black velvet use, or traveling mats, which they can overlay images together like we do today. And they could do that for overlaying a video or a film of the people doing action on top of a tiny screen. So yeah, they could easily do that, but they did that a lot.
It's so interesting that these things are like amazing technologies, and yet they act like they're perfectly normal. All right, her name is Lisa Glendon. She is played by Valerie Hobson. She played Elizabeth Frankenstein in Bride of Frankenstein filming at the same time. And we talked about, in the previous episode, we talked about a corridor that went between the two film sets. All right, so the thing that kind of makes it weird is when you think about how old she is. She's like 18, but she's like played as older. Of course, Henry Hull, is way older than 18. It's just kind of strange.
Talk about age gap, man.
No, it super is, and we get hit in the face with that wage gap, that age gap in just a minute. So Lisa is wanting him to leave his dusty lab and socialize with upper crust people, and these upper crust people seem to be as annoying to Dr. Glendon as they are to us.
Yeah, this is scintillating conversation. Where's the main guy?
Indeed.
They were annoying, man.
A lot of the conversation before the 14-minute mark, actually, there's a lot of conversation between, like, the family members and all the party, whatever things going on. That's so fillery, especially in this movie, that it's just like, there's so much conversation that personally me and Dad didn't really care about it.
There's another time where there's a lot of filler in there. You're just kind of like, get to the werewolf.
You could be filling it with, like, more better thematic elements, more werewolf showings. You could have more cool special effects. I mean, of course, it would be more expensive, obviously, than just a conversation between people. But, I mean, there's different ways you could dolly things out that is less fillery.
Right, true.
Maybe we get actually important information.
Right. So Glendon says he's lost track of time. Everybody's been asking for him. He's been in that lab forever. He promised as soon as he finds these discoveries, he'll come out and socialize with everybody. So here we go. We get Aunt Eddie Coombs. She's played by Spring Byington, an actress here. She wants to see the Moonlight device. Glendon says no. Aunt Eddie talks way too much. She's a perfectly nice lady, I'm sure, but she gets names wrong a lot, which is kind of supposed to be a joke, but it's kind of like, okay, that probably played funnier in back in the day, but there's a couple characters that just talk way too much.
I think there was one time where she misnamed a composer for a painter.
Botticelli.
She's like, is that Botticelli? It's like, no, it's not. That's a painter.
Yeah, the other lady, Lady Forsyth, she kind of, takes the cake with her and kind of goes, okay, look, you're kind of dumb. Also, she calls a character called Dr. Yogami. She calls him Dr. Yokohama, which is actually a location in Japan, which is interesting. So they do show this Venus flytrap and this other plant that eats frogs and mice.
Where else did we see a Venus flytrap but Nosferatu?
Nosferatu, that's true. And I think that's to show that nature is predatory, so we're going to see some...
By the way, when we talked earlier about introducing things with a film that people wouldn't realize, they would think it's like, the Wolfman introduced this, or like it was just around, but no, it was the werewolf. Nosferatu introduced the vampires not liking the sunlight.
Right.
Not Dracula, which is interesting. You don't realize those until you realize, this film introduced that. Interesting.
Yes. So we see this other older lady who's Lady Forsyth. She's played by Charlotte Granville. She is the wife of a Colonel Forsyth who is with Scotland Yard, who's connected to another character. Lady Forsyth is escorting Paul Ames, okay? Paul, turns out, is an old friend of Lisa Glendon. He calls her, like, Lee, because that's what they used to call... she used to go by that name when she was little. So Wilfred is looking on with concern or jealousy. It turns out Paul and Lisa used to know each other when they were little kids. They used to jump off of roofs with parachutes, and he used to put jam in each other's hair. He proposed to her when she was 6 and he was 12, which means there's a 6-year gap between them, which is wrong because he's 35 in real life and she's 18. There's quite a big gap there. I wanted to mention that. So Paul has an airplane or something, and that comes into. He mentions that it comes into play later in the rest of the movie, and Glendon takes this moment to kind of be kind of snarky with him that he doesn't have the ambition that Glendon has. In my mind, you know, some people just have simple joys in life, and what's wrong with that? And honestly, joy in life is something that Paul has, and he said that Lisa used to have, and it's like gone from her. He sees a lot of difference.
So is this where we get Dr. Yagami then?
Yes, Dr. Yagami comes in, played by Werner Oland. We noticed that.
By the way, I think this is like 14 minutes around the film. There was like this big puppety looking monster plant in like a cage. He has like lots of botany things going around. I just wanted to mention how cool that is. We haven't seen puppets really at all, in fact, in our podcast so far, but we're definitely going to see lots more again.
Yes, viva la puppet.
And indeed, this is the only 14 minutes into the film do we get actual, you know, like, important information start coming our way. The plot progresses further.
Yes, I think, honestly, part of this, I think, is setting the stage. It's also kind of creating, you have to create this world of normalcy and normality and just banality and blandness. You know, it's just his regular everyday life.
I guess in general I say it's filler, but it's like, you know, if we cut out filler of a lot of our Universal films that we've been doing, then we'd have like 30-minute bonanzas, basically.
Yes, exactly.
So there needs to be some elements in there in order to put it to a full hour or hour 30 runtime. Just make sure that they're actually, you know, pertinent and necessary somewhat, and not just filling out time or padding out time.
And you're anticipating when the craziness is going to occur.
And we do get some lengthy scenes in this movie that do deserve to have the credit for a little bit of padding, because we do have a scene later with some not important characters that goes on for like a while, and it does nothing for the story.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to mention that. All right, so Glendon asks him, have I met you before? And he says, we met once in the dark in Tibet. Of course, that is a clue about something that happens in the film. So he says they were on a similar mission to find the Mariphasa plant. His specimens, Dr. Yogami's specimens, died. Glendon says that he has had trouble getting his to bloom. Yogami wants to see them, but Glendon's like, no. Paul is talking to Lisa, you know, how he's kind of trying to get, you know, he's trying to sidle up to her, you know, how that is. Paul says that something has changed in Lisa. She's not as lively as she once was, and Paul says that a lot of that liveliness was when she was younger, and it was gone when she got married to Glendon.
The thing is, this was fighting spirits, so she used to, like, fight and be all girl boss until apparently she did anymore. But again,
it's her toothache, but really it's not really a toothache. It's just kind of her whole life is.
Well, Orson Welles used the same device. It's like, it's a toothache,
right,
you know, right?
That's right. But that was actually literally a toothache, I think, wasn't it? And he just helped her out in forgetting it.
Yeah, but it's sort of an excuse. Again, this lore that we filled out, again, isn't really necessary to the movie, but at least we got some good NPC backgrounds, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
It's like reading the D&D background to a character who's in another town, in another
that you'll never
campaign side of the world, you know?
Yeah.
That you're never going to need to know.
Yeah. So Yogami tells Wilfred Glendon that the Mariphasa is not a cure for werewolfery or lycanthropy or lycanthrophobia. It's an antidote, not a cure. So it like staves it off.
The real cure is that you must kill what you like most.
Or death. You can be killed with a bullet, can't you?
A silver bullet, that is. Although, again, we don't get the silver bullet.
We don't get the silver bullet yet. The silver thing
until somewhat later, I guess.
Yeah, we start hearing about the silver thing with the Wolfman in 1941, but we don't hear anything about silver specifically connected to this.
For now, it's a flower.
Yeah, the flower thing. So Yogami says that the werewolf is not a man or a wolf, but the worst parts of both. You have enough of your mind that you know, if it's cold outside, you decide to put on a coat. So for all those people that go outside without a coat, a werewolf in the midst of his beast nature is still smarter than you are. So Glendon does not believe in this stuff. He says, ghosts and goblins. I don't believe in that stuff. Right. So is that ghost?
He doesn't believe in ghosts and goblins, no.
The goblins, yeah. So Yogami says there are 2 cases of werewolfism in London right now.
And that is, of course, Yogami and Glendon, obviously.
Yeah, he's hinting that him and Glendon both are.
It's interesting that there literally isn't really any jig to be had in this movie.
No, but it's good.
You both know that they're werewolves by this time, at least if you're smart, to discern it from their dialogue.
Yeah, Yogami touches Glendon's arm where his scar is, and that leads me to believe that he knows that it was actually him that bit him. So Dr. Yogami is introduced to Lisa, Wilfred's wife. Dr. Glendon is in the laboratory with his assistant.
Jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to watch weird people on my green screen.
Other plants that only bloom at night will bloom with the moon ray, but not the Merry phase, except it does start blooming because, again, the full moon is starting to come out. It looks like 2 buds are going to bloom, right? So another thing that starts blooming is the hairs on Glendon's hand.
Creative transition.
Yeah, it's pretty good. The assistant is rudely told to leave. I think he's just trying to spare him. Maybe he doesn't want anybody see him turn him to a wolfman. Also, maybe he's also worried that if something does happen, he'd do something to him.
And this, again, with his hand turning under the moonlight, that is a special effect. Again, the special effects, that's just something you could say about the movie. Special effects are really great, especially with, like, the makeup transformations and the stuff they do with it. The special effects, I was saying, really is what aiding with this, is the special effects similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So continue.
Yes, there's another thing that actually is related to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, too, in part of the effect. We'll talk about that in a later scene. I kind of noticed it and went, wow, that looks a lot like Frederick March's transformation. So Glendon takes a bloom of the Mariphasa and he sticks himself in the arm with it, and it makes the hairs it makes the change stop. So it's like a temporary antidote. Okay, so another area, Aunt Eddie and Lady Forsyth, Paul and Lisa are all eating together. Wilfred's still in the lab, and Paul asks Lisa to go out. They're like going to go out and do something in town. It's a good idea for her to have fun, even if Wilfred won't, because Wilfred's like, I'm not going to go out.
And I think there is a part where she goes horseback riding with some weird boyfriend later.
That's the second thing, yeah.
So overall, she just wants to go out in general at this point, and that's where that comes to a climax of idea.
He's kind of controlling of her and saying, I don't want you going out. And she's like, I still want to have a good time, and I do love you, but you're being kind of jealous, and it's kind of jerky.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. Keep going.
Yeah, a little bit. So you get some extra dialogue from the ladies, unfortunately, and Aunt Eddie's dog barks a little bit as Dr. Yogami comes in.
This movie, I will say, does have excellent use of dogs as well as dog people, I do say. But yeah, the dogs are really well used in this movie.
the dog notices Dr. Yogami, right? He barks at him a little bit. But there's a part toward the end
where there's another dog.
There's another dog.
I did notice that.
He sees him, and the dog doesn't bark at all. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's a dog here and a dog there. Dog everywhere.
That dog at the other part should be like growling at him.
Maybe, but it's a good use of dogs anyway. You got 2 dogs in this movie.
Well,
pretty good.
the cat is the one I like. So how he reacts. So
yeah, we'll get to that soon.
So Eddie gets Dr. Yogami's name wrong. She gets a couple of names wrong. She calls him Dr. Yokohama. She invites him to a party even though he says he's busy.
She's like, my party is especially for busy people, people who have to work like the 9 to 5 or whatever.
She will not let any excuse, he's like, I really can't come. And she's like, nonsense, of course you can
Night
come.
of the Hunter, where it's like, if you want my fudge, you gotta come to my party.
Oh, great.
That's sort of the same sort of idea, although she's a lot more expressive in her idea than Aunt Eddie. Aunt Eddie is just gets names wrong, and
she's kind of annoying.
Same sort of idea of person, but Night of the Hunter executes it better.
It really does. With the other character in that movie. So Dr. Yogami comes to try to visit with Dr. Glendon again. Yogami's telling Glendon that tonight's the first night of the full moon. He says, I need 2 blossoms. It will save 2 souls. It only lasts a couple hours. It keeps the werewolf from changing and killing. And Glendon's not ready to give up the blossoms. So Yogami warns him, and this is the part that we get the infamous line. He says, the werewolf instinctively tries to kill that which he loves the best. That's definitely going to come into play. Probably Lisa, spoilers, because you think, okay, well, he said, I love you very soon. So Glendon is in his study, and he's reading about lycanthropy, werewolfism, whatever, and somebody steals two of the blossoms. Of course, you get one guess who that is. Of course, it's probably Yogami.
Yeah, and look, Yogami's really doing this because he was like, hey, we know about this cure. He's like, hey, this cure can cure the both of us. We could probably share this thing and probably stay not being werewolves together, be buddy-buddy, But then he's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want the discovery to get out of the world and share the things. Sharing is caring, by the way.
It is. It really is.
That only because of that, Yogami is sort of doing this. So it's like, is Glendon at fault here?
Yes.
For the conflict? Yes, probably.
They're both a little bit at fault too.
Yeah, because he obviously bit. But you can't control biting people. You're a werewolf.
Right.
You have to kill somebody, or not kill somebody.
You have to do something.
Kill somebody or pass it on.
Right. So, it's sharing is caring, and he shared his curse with him. So the book that Glendon's reading says that unless the rare flowers are used, then we know what that is, the werewolf must kill at least one human being per full moon. So Lisa comes in, she says, her and Paul are going to a party. Glendon says, hey, have a good time. The light burns his eyes. She turns on the light. So he's going through changes now. So Glendon sits down and he turns out the lights, and there's a cat there, and the cat senses the changes is going on and starts hissing. Glendon has already started changing. This is a cool scene. He walks out of the house, and you get this great shot where he's walking through the courtyard, passing by these columns, and every column he passes, the makeup gets more elaborate, but still not as elaborate as Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman makeup. But I'll tell you, if they had CGI, this would have looked a lot better, but they did the best they could.
They did the best they could, but some notes about that. In reacting to the cat, I said that it sounded like Donald Duck, which is hilarious.
We have to play that, yeah.
We have to play comparison here, yeah. And again, there was this transformation scene where he turns into a werewolf and he's going past pillars. That's how he's transitioning between makeup to makeup. But yeah, it's really amazing what they could do. They use the green screen to back behind him and probably project pillars onto him so that he can...
Yes, and they're doing it in layers. And you can do that with modern technology, off-the-shelf editing software, free... Yes, and so Glendon goes to his lab for the blossoms, and those blossoms have been clipped. Wilfred is thinking about Lisa and Paul, and he goes and puts a coat on and warm clothing. So now we are at the party.
But to not skip him going out in a coat, this is similar to Mr. Hyde going out in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He doesn't do the characteristic of, licking the rain off, putting the rain on his tongue, sticking his tongue out. Remember that?
Yeah.
He's just reveling in the rain. But in Werewolf of London, Henry Hole doesn't really do that sort of thing.
He just kind of sneaks around, yeah.
Yeah, then again, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde did much better version
it's so good.
A monstrous werewolf-looking character.
Yes, but I will tell you that the Wolfman, he only wears the clothes that the human is wearing at the time. He doesn't go, hey, let me go put on this coat because I need to put it on and hide a little bit better. He just goes out and does his thing. There's not a lot of thought to it.
Yeah, not a lot of thought to it. This was also in the movie where I questioned, hey, is this actually going to be in London, or are you going to do anything with your setting? And apart from dress and, the sets sort of looking Englishy, or British, I'd rather say.
It is. Very
English. They don't really take advantage of their setting too much, though.
They do. It's London. They're probably using...
it's London for the setting and the costumes that they have on the actors, but I really feel like they could have done more with it. I mean, they didn't need to, fight on top of Big Ben or something, but they surely could have done something with their setting that made Werewolf in London specifically be important to be in London. Why is it in London?
But they do mention that Aunt Eddie's house is more on the cheap side. It's on the other side of the Thames River. And she said, here we have the rich part. I can see at one side of my house. The other side, I can see the cheap side. And she's like, she likes the fact that it's just like the real people or whatever. And what that does is it means that it kind of makes it where Glendon can do some action there, but he can also very quickly go do some action close by with some people that are not as, rich as people at the party.
Speaking of the party, we're at the party.
Speaking of the party, it turns out Paul's uncle is the Lord Forsyth, whatever guy. He's actually like big in Scotland Yard. And
Scotland Yard, for the people who read Sherlock Holmes, will probably know is it's Scotland Yard is it actually located in Scotland? I don't think.
No,
it's not located in Scotland, but it's basically like this. It's like related to the police in some sort of way, like a police department or like full of detectives or something. Because in Sherlock Holmes,
inspectors,
you'll see
FBI kind of thing.
Yeah, you'll in maybe like Interpol for France, except Interpol might just be police, but.
Interpol is much bigger than England and Italy and France. It's like it's all over. They've got, cells everywhere.
Yeah, that's Interpolice. But it's basically, in Sherlock Holmes, you'll see him as there's like this rival detective or something that'll come up who is on the case as well. But Sherlock Holmes is sort of like, pass it on to me, I'll do it greatly.
Inspector Legrand or something?
Yeah, I think so.
I can't remember his name. It's been a while.
Well, that's the role of Scotland Yard, basically. He's like into an agency of detective police, sort of governmental work.
Right. So Dr. Yogami and Aunt Eddie are out on the balcony. They hear a wolf howl, and she goes, "What is it?" And he says, "It's a lost soul, perhaps." I love the stuff he says.
Maybe there's a whole island of them sitting somewhere.
Of beastmen, in fact. So then we get Dr. Glendon stalking the streets, and for some reason it looks like Aunt Eddie is on the sauce, or she's scared or something. So Paul and Lisa take her up to her bed. They have her lie down.
Yeah, because she's so delirious at that point.
She is. And Paul, is talking to Lord Forsyth, and they're kind of like, she's had a little bit to drink. Oh, you know how that is. And they're walking off like kind of, it's nothing. So we get this great shot of Wilfred Glendon coming in through the second story window to Aunt Eddie's room. She sees the werewolf face coming closer.
And honestly, I remarked on this face being really sort of weird. He has this like all his lips scrunched up in a weird way. It's not like a like with the fangs out sort of snarly thing, but it's more like a sort of motion.
He's got these fangs on the bottom sticking out, and so does the Wolfman.
Reminds me sort of Draco Malfoy for some reason. Maybe because of like the hairstyle, I guess.
It looks like Draco Malfoy ate some pickles or something.
He had polyjuice potion.
He has this look on his face like he smelled something bad or something. He has a squinched up face.
It's a really weird facial thing that I was just like, why are you doing that with your face, Henry Hole? You could be doing something a bit better, but it's iconic, honestly.
Yeah, it kind of is. So Yogami knows that maybe Glendon is there, so he keeps Lisa from going upstairs. I think he probably thinks that he'd be in danger. They get up there. Dr. Glendon is gone, but Aunt Eddie has lost her mind. She's absolutely hysterical. Now, down in the streets on what we call Goose Lane, which I guess is in the cheap side, there's a murder, and it looks like Wilfred Glendon does it. He attacked and killed a woman. Dr. Yogami is really sad about it. I think he sees it in the news. It turns out that Goose Lane is near Aunt Eddie's house, and there's a conversation with the inspector. Okay, Paul is there, and he said, and Paul actually thinks it's a werewolf. And then when he says, I don't think it's a werewolf, he gives the whole, and I mentioned this to William when we watched it. It's this whole line that it's from Hamlet, and it's there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio, or whatever. I can't do it exactly justice, but
I don't know why people would quote this line, but here's us talking about it.
Everybody always quotes that. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio. It could be Mothman. Mothman? There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio.
It could be a platypus riding a polar bear that happens to be a Mothman in disguise. It's wearing a costume. There are more things in the world, Horatio.
Yeah, it gets quoted so many times in movies because they're like,
I feel like they're trying to be sophisticated
in
their references, because they're like, oh, we're referring to Shakespeare, instead of going like, there are more things under the sun, referring to the Bible, or like, who knows?
Yes,
just saying who knows.
Well, who knows? So the next morning, Lisa says she's been talking to Paul, and there's your Moonlight Ride reference. She wants to go on a Moonlight Ride tonight. And of course, Glendon doesn't want to do that. It's the full moon again. I was like, full moon again? But I looked it up, and sometimes a full moon can appear to last for multiple days, like 3 or 4 days out of a month. So he's freaked out by the newspaper story about the Goose Lane murder. Get a little, sharp with each other, and he finally relents and said, I'll go on the moonlight ride. Of course, he doesn't. But the moon ray is not bringing out the blooms, but the assistant says that the real moonlight will probably do it in the next full moon. And Glendon says it'll probably be too late because, he wants that blossom because he's trying to keep from killing again. So Glendon is planning on getting out of town. He thinks he's going to turn into a werewolf, and he's trying to protect Lisa. And he tells Lisa and Paul they probably shouldn't go out riding tonight, but she doesn't like making promises like that. She wants to ride any night she wants to. You can't tell me what to do.
And especially this feeling can be supposed by all of this movie. Basically, from this point, she's been really wearing a dress, but this is when she finally gets into the rider's uniform, with the fancy pants and the nice cap and stuff. And that's sort of like freeing from the dress that is the norm and being freer to move around, basically, because dresses are very bulky,
So now, unfortunately, we are at this little inn. Again, when you get to an inn, I keep thinking of Invisible Man, but the stuff, I think that they probably thought, oh, it's like an inn, like in the Invisible Man. Well, we have to have some kooky characters. We got, okay, we can't get Una O'Connor. She's busy in Bride of Frankenstein. We got to get some Una O'Connor stand-ins. Okay, so we get Mrs. Whack, which is interesting that her name is Whack because, her acting's whack. No, I'm kidding. She gets whacked on the head a couple times, what I'm saying. And we get Mrs. Whack and Mrs. Moncaster. And I wrote in my notes, a.k.a. the skip button.
Yeah, you're right, the skip button.
When you see them, you want to hit the skip button.
Yeah, when you see them hammer the 10-second button a couple times, they don't say anything important.
Hit A on your controller is what I'm saying, so you can skip that scene. So I'm just saying, they're comic relief. They're really unnecessary. So Dr. Glendon comes in, and he wants to rent a room with Miss Moncaster up above.
They're not like a Three Stooges sort of... what was the other 3 comedy people called?
The Marx Brothers.
Not as good as, like any comedy trio that would actually be worth seeing interact off each other. If you have some good side NPCs that interact off each other pretty well, it can be pretty entertaining, but this is not too entertaining.
This is not it. So it feels like Mrs. Whack, or Mrs. Moncaster or whatever, talks his ear off as they're going upstairs. I don't even remember half of what she said, and I watched it a couple times. So they go upstairs, and he says, I want to be able to lock the door. And immediately, as he gets in the door, he's like, yep. And he locks the door and shuts it. I'm like, yeah, he's done with that conversation. That's his skip button. So now when he's in there, he prays. And I started thinking, the prayers that get done are very kind of weak in comparison to the prayers of Dr. Jekyll by Frederick March, because Frederick March's biblical references that he does in the prayers and the penance that he's doing, it's so much better. I'm sorry, I don't want me to compare these two actors.
So much more vivid, even though it could be a little bit cheesy in execution.
Oh well, of course,
because he's like, please forgive me my penance. To the girlfriend, and he's like resigning to the girlfriend.
It's overly dramatic, but I kind of like it. So he's in there, he locks the window, but how's that going to stop a wolfman, right? So he changes, and there's a part where they do a little bit of jump cut changes in the hands or whatever, but there's a part where it looks like they do something similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with the changes in the face, where they did the color change with the camera, where it showed the red or the green, pulled that up more. I wonder if they did something like that, because I can see on his face that his skin starts changing live in camera. So I don't know, man, that's what I was thinking, that maybe they used some techniques that were used back in, I think it was 31, or when did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde come out? 31?
31.
Yeah, so they've had some time to kind of have that technology in there. So after changing, Glendon jumps out the window, and that didn't hold anybody inside.
Yeah, stop jumping out the window. You're going to be a bad example. Oh, wait, too late already.
Too late.
It's been a century.
Yeah.
And we're already telling people to not jump off of stuff.
Yeah, we've told people that all the time. So that we get Mrs. Whack and Mrs. Moncaster, and they're talking it up on the stairs again. Again, another scene to skip. Right, so, okay, there's this blonde woman who comes to visit a security guard at the zoo for romance, and Glendon is stalking around, and he sees these wolves, and he releases them into the wild. This does come into play in the story. It does actually have a point to the story.
But it's at least an interesting location for a scene, though. It's like, oh, it's the zoo. interesting. He interacts with the animals. That's interesting. But they don't do too much with it other than, or he releases a wolf.
Yeah, and it becomes something that they can blame for.
And he lurks around to the background of a conversation, which is, while cool, it's just, they could do more with, like, a zoo setting. Like, have him epic chase around the zoo. That'd be cool.
He does attack the woman there, I think, and so that might show up in a newspaper clipping, I think, and so somebody can, be horrified by that. So Mrs. Whack and Mrs. Moncaster are drinking on the stairs, and Glendon, as the Wolfman, comes back to his room, and they hear the wolf noises. They're like, what's going on? And they go look in the keyhole, and there he is. So, and then they're screaming, and then, okay, here we go.
And then they do, like, this overlay effect with putting images into a keyhole bat.
Yeah. So we're back to Scotland Yard. They're still trying to figure out who did the murders. Then we do a scene back with Yogami. He's used both his blossoms, his Mary Feza blossoms, and he's panicking. So he goes and talks to Scotland Yard, and he told him that the murders that happened the last couple nights and will happen more soon, some more is going to happen next month, unless he gets the Mary Feza plants from Dr. Glendon. The inspector says that a wolf has been seen roaming about, but Paul said the murder on Goose Lane happened 2 nights ago, so it couldn't be that wolf, right? So Wilfred Glendon and his assistant in another scene are looking at the blossom, and it's not blooming yet. The assistant says maybe another night before it blooms, so that means that there's going to be another murder, right? So Glendon panics, and he says he has to really leave town. Wilfred Glendon drives out to what I guess is his old home that he used to live in, and he wants to be locked up in a top room for protection. It's like this old-looking room. It's not a room that he used to stay in. I think it's just a room he knows about. And it looks really run down, but it looks like you probably could lock somebody up in there. Wilfred says that he wants the door locked until dawn, but the groundskeeper doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it. Then we get Paul and Lisa driving through the countryside. It's light out, and then when they get to the old house, suddenly it's nighttime. But they go to the old house because I think that Wilfred and Lisa remember that old house, and so I think she's wanting to show it to him. So they're down there in the courtyard, and they're playing hide and seek or something. Paul expresses his love for her, but she's like, yeah, don't do that. She's kind of pushing him off. But because they're playing hide and seek, Wilfred, who has, of course, changed into a werewolf, looks out the window and thinks that she's either in danger or he's jealous or something. So he pulls the bars open with his wolfman strength and leaps down. He makes Lisa scream, and Paul comes to the rescue, and they have a fight. Okay, so he's trying to leak? No, the wolf guy is trying to choke out Lisa. So yeah, he's starting to kill the one he loves the most right there. So Paul gives him a really good whack with a stick.
Just an excellent bonk.
Excellent bonk, yes sir, quite so. So Paul reports back to his uncle, and he said, I think I fought a werewolf, and he looked really familiar, like Wilfred Glendon. Again, this is probably why the makeup was not super hiding of a face. You could still see it looks like Henry Hull, right? You can still see it when he's turned to a wolf. They are going to go arrest somebody at Wilfred Glendon's manor, but another inspector runs in and says there was a murder of a chambermaid at this other location. And of course, it's Yogami's chambermaid that you see earlier. And there's the Mary Feza plants. They're in the trash can now. So the chief inspector and Paul, they start to put the story together. They start calling a lot of different people to figure out where he's at. The assistant's at the lab. He hears this banging in the floor, and it's Dr. Glendon in this little secret compartment, right?
Is this where we get a sort of finalish battle?
Yes.
With Dr. Yogami and Dr. Glendon? They're wrestling over this last blossom?
Yes.
Of the Mary Feza?
Yes.
And I think Dad remarked over here that that this fight, there's obviously stuntmen.
Yes. What I said is that a transformation has taken place. These Werner Oland and Henry Hull have turned into obvious stunt people. Here's the deal. If you watch old Star Trek episodes, you notice that they will show Kirk from behind, and it's obviously not Kirk. And he starts fighting. You're like, they turned into a stuntman all of a sudden. Now he's back to Kirk. Now he's a stuntman.
But now with the deepfake technology going around at Disney, they can actually make the stunt people look more like him.
Yeah, like Luke. Yeah, like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, maybe that would be somewhat more of an excellent use of that. But, it's a bit creepy of practice anyway to go like, oh, I'm going to turn this random dude into, I don't know, Jackie Chan or something.
No, they do that. They do that sometimes. They take the actor's face and put it on a stunt person's body. They did that in there's a the movie Jurassic Park, there's a scene where the little blonde girl is hanging from a little opening in the ceiling, and there's a raptor that's starting to come up, and she looks up at the camera and then looks down. And it's good. For just a second they put the actress's face on the stunt woman's body, and because it was kind of a crazy stunt to do.
Interesting, the things he could do digitally.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll see that a lot as going into the digital age.
But yeah, climactic battle.
Yes.
Wrestling match.
Yes.
From two men who used to be in Tibet.
Right. So Glendon is starting to change into a werewolf. He actually kills Dr. Yogami. Aunt Eddie and Lisa hear the noises, and they call Colonel Forsyth on the phone. They see Wilfred the werewolf coming after them in the house.
Wilfred the werewolf sounds like a cartoon character, honestly.
I read a book, it's Wilfred the werewolf.
Wilfred the werewolf eats all the children.
Yeah, from the same people who made Clifford the big red dog. So Wilfred the werewolf comes in after them in the house. Paul comes over. He gets attacked and knocked out. Wilfred breaks in through the front door to come after Lisa. And just then, Colonel Forsyth makes it inside and shoots Wilfred dead.
And it's definitely not silver.
It's not a silver bullet.
It'll do, donkey, it'll do.
It'll do, donkey. Glendon says, "Thanks for the bullet. It was the only way. In a few moments I shall know why all this had to be. Goodbye, Lisa. I'm sorry. I couldn't make you happy."
Note that this is Glendon talking as a werewolf.
It's pretty cool.
Not only is he pranced around town in clothes, normally, but he talks as well. There can be some hide comparisons to this, but he's like, this is interesting for a standpoint. It's like the werewolf you would think is intelligent, really, at this point, unless you notice that he goes out in a normal suit. But he talks only at this moment, conveniently. I was like, just confused.
Goodbye, dear fellows. It was the only way. And now he's polite now. Why couldn't you do this before?
As just like Jekyll and Hyde and other similar transformation movies,
he's just like, goodbye. I wish I could have made you happy in your life, Lisa. I'm dying now. Goodbye.
Yeah, and he changes, of course, back into full human. Invisible Man, they did this. In the Wolfman, they're gonna do that. In Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, they do that. Then he changes back, and we see this cloudy sky, an image of a flying airplane. You're probably thinking, what does that have to do? I think it's Paul taking Lisa for a ride in the airplane. And then suddenly the airplane circles the planet Earth and says, it's a universal picture. So
the thing is, there is no transition. Well, there's a transition between that, which is the fade out, fade in. But I would have loved it to, integrate somehow, make a new special effect where they have that airplane and then suddenly magically turn it into the universal plane where it's spinning around. That would be epic, though. It's like a regular plane going around and then going around the sky, and then it pans over to the universal logo and it spins around. More expensive, but would have been cool. I wish they'd done that ever in their lifetime, honestly, but they didn't do that.
I want to see Lisa and Paul happy. I want to see, maybe he's flying the plane and he turns over and he's holding her hand as they're flying the plane, and she's happy, for real happy.
I mean, RoccoW, King Kong, they had airplane shots, but I guess it was limited budget that could do a lot of these things. We're like, oh, we want you to do these awesome, cool things. You couldn't do that.
And Paul, it mentions earlier that Paul has his own, airplane, company or whatever. And he said, that I ask nothing more of life. And Glendon says, that must be really nice to ask nothing more of life as that. He's basically saying he's kind of casting aspersions on Paul because he doesn't have the ambitions he does. Well, the thing is, his ambitions, there's just enough that makes him happy, including Lisa, that maybe Paul is, I hate to say it, Paul is better for Lisa.
All right, so this was a production and plot for Werewolf of London. The production was very, very, very minuscule, but
very scant, but but good.
A short production does not a bad movie make,
Yeah.
The movie is pretty good for a Universal movie. When I was watching the movie and it said Universal on there, I was just like, wait, this is a Universal movie? I thought the Wolfman was the first werewolf movie they did. But it's interesting that they did this earlier and no one really knows about it, but it also did establish a lot of things in werewolf lore that have gone over people's heads in society. And that's something I find interesting. Again, as I said, special effects are the thing that make a lot of this movie good, is that there's a whole transformation scene, which is pretty ambitious for what they could do.
I think this was honestly, a lot of this feels like practice for the Wolfman. They didn't even know they were going to do the Wolfman.
It's sort of something along the lines of the Black Cat, except instead of doing Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff again because they couldn't get them, they did other people instead.
I'm glad, because they could at least get this movie out, because
they did The Raven, though.
I
think that was this year.
Too many Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi movies.
It kind of gets stagnant.
Yeah,
and this really destagnated the runner-up monster movie lists.
Yes.
And again, I would rate this sort of along with the Black Cat, sort of. If you feel that the special effects are what make this movie higher than the Black Cat, I'd say it could do well too.
It's pretty good. I think this movie is pretty good. I do think there wasn't enough werewolf scenes.
There was a lot of, filler padding, especially with a lot of these two side characters in the later portion, and especially in the early portion, we get these other characters that sort of fill out the world maybe, but are very, very secondary to their things. Although Dad did care about at least Lisa and Paul having a good life, but that was our thoughts about this movie. Next movie we're doing is The Invisible Man. The Invisible Ray, sorry.
Yeah.
Which, again, is not a sequel to Invisible Man.
Right.
I think that was Invisible Man Returns.
No, this was The Invisible Man's cousin, Ray. No, this movie has nothing to do with Invisible Man or anything like that. In fact, I'm not sure what, the title, The Invisible Ray, is very strange to put on.
And it will be our return to science fiction movies since, we did The Trip to the Moon. That was, science fiction-y because they went to the moon. What else was, purely science fiction we did? No, not really anything. Because we have The Lost World, that's like a dinosaur movie.
That's very science fiction, I say. But this has purely scientific elements as the horror.
But we haven't seen that in a while.
No, yeah, we haven't.
And we're going to see a lot of purely science fiction-y films as we keep going. But this is the return to science fiction for us, basically.
It's weird. The movie is weird, and it does have Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi again, and they do a great job, but we'll talk about that more when we get to that as our next movie.
Yeah, we'll talk about things more when we get to that, but again, this has been Jason and William talking about Werewolf of London. It's a fairly quick episode, but again, that's not due to the movie's fault. It's to the fault of we barely have anything on it. We had barely anything on the silent movies, okay? So that's why those were a lot shorter, but this one is going to probably be, shorter than, I don't know, Son of Kong.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with a short episode.
And again, as I said, a short production does not a bad movie make.
Right.
You have to rate the movie based on what you watch of it and the material it has, not by its really short production history.
I think this movie is fun. I liked watching it with you and talking about it. We'll see you next time when we talk about The Invisible Ray.
Thanks for listening to Cinematic Fantastic Podcast. Click here and here for some more excellent content. Hope you'll enjoy it. See you soon!